And the government simply can't cope. Dragon's Den entrepreneur James Caan on Pakistan's plight.
The sheer magnitude of the devastation here is way beyond their capability.
Good morning to you. Nick Clegg has vowed that Britain will stand by Pakistan in its hour of need as he praised the public's generosity in raising funds for the flood relief effort. The Deputy Prime Minister is due to visit the Disasters Emergency Committee headquarters today, whose appeal has reached £33 million.
Well, TV dragon James Caan has been to Pakistan, where he was helping with the relief effort, and he was staggered by the scale of the devastation.
The only answer in this situation is we need to provide aid, and most importantly, they need our financial support, because we are looking at a reconstruction program here that is already estimated at $10 billion, and in simple terms, they don't have those funds.
Well, James Caan is back and joins us now, and you've put your money where your mouth is. You've donated your own money, haven't you, to this? How bad are things?
When I went out there, I was quite sceptical about, A, was the money getting through, was the aid getting through, but more importantly, was the government really doing anything? Because there's been a lot of criticism against the government. And I must admit, I was pleasantly surprised, because I went to see the general who's coordinating all the activities. And what he said to me was, even in America, when Katrina happened, that the US government struggled for the first 2 weeks to mobilise troops, aid, logistics, food. And the scale of this is so much bigger that they just can't cope with it. So I think my conclusion was, actually, I think they're doing a very good job.
So it's not incompetence, it's just an enormous task they're faced with. And the money isn't enough. I mean, £33 million have been donated to the British people, which I think is an enormous amount of money in these times. But it's nowhere near enough, is it?
Well, you know, that was the other thing that I noticed, that when you said, is aid getting through? The interesting thing, the aid was getting through. The problem is, there's just not enough of it. So I'll give an example. If you go to an area where there's 10,000 people and you've only got food for 1,000 people, because that's all that's come through. So the answer is, there was food, but not enough. And when they're throwing the food out, in a way, what really broke my heart was actually physically watching that these were normal human beings. You know, they're poor people, they've got their families, and as the aid was sent, we're almost turning them into dogs, because they're just scrambling for that piece of bread or that bottle of water.
Literally the survival of the fittest.
And that was the thing that really, you know, when I was giving out the food, you know, I was standing there, because, of course, they all charge. The old women, they get left behind, the kids get left behind, and just the strong end up with the food. And the answer is, there's just not enough. We're just not giving them enough.
Why aren't we giving enough? I can't believe it's the British people don't care enough about the plight of people in this terrible situation. Is it something to do with the politics of Pakistan, of a distrust of the government? There have been a lot of comments and an implication of links with terrorism and the Taliban. Is that having any effect at all, do you think?
I'm sure that must be a thought that goes through people's mind. And when I spoke to the General, I mean, I was very direct and said to him that people in Britain, one of the reasons that maybe they're concerned is because of some of these issues that the government have had. And he openly said, you know, this is not about politics. This is about saving the lives of people. You know, there are organisations like UNICEF, like Oxfam, like Save the Children. You know, the appeal that we're doing with DEC, he said, happily give it to them, but don't ignore, you know, the plight of these people, because it's not their problem, it's not what they've done. And, you know, for me, when I was going round on a boat, and it was the most amazing experience when you literally, you're going on this little fishing boat, and as I'm looking down, I'm seeing utensils of people's belongings coming to the surface, or, you know, as you go through, there's somebody's little rooftop, and you look down and you think, my God, there's an entire village, you know, and there was 4,500 villages, 4,500 villages literally underwater. And when you look at all the infrastructure, just silly things like they've got to build 3,500 miles of motorway, you know, 4,000 miles of rail tracks which have disappeared. So when you say 33 million is a lot of money, when you put it into context of what they need, we have to do more.
No, you make powerful points, James. You make very powerful points, and you can see more of James's journey to Pakistan on ITV News bulletins throughout the day, put together by Juliet Bremner, absolutely brilliantly as well. For more information on how you can help, you can log on to our website. That's gm.tv. I'm sorry we don't have more time, James. Was it Juliet Chingham or Juliet?
Juliet Bremner.
Juliet Bremner.
Outstanding journalist.
Yeah, excellent. OK, good. News at 10
Here we
tonight.
go.
The amount donated by the British public to the Pakistan floods appeal has now reached £35 million. The United Nations says there's a desperate need for more helicopters to get food to those who can only be reached by air. And the importance of helicopters was all too clear to businessman and Dragon's Den star James Caan, who's been to Pakistan. We travelled with him as he tried to help those suffering in the country of his birth. In the second of her reports on James Caan's journey of discovery, Juliet Bremner watched him doing what he can.
Time is precious. Businessman James Caan understands the urgency. The sacks of flour delivered by US Marines are a critical lifeline for more than 1.5 million people still cut off in northwest Pakistan. But despite the best efforts of the crew of 15 US helicopters, the Pakistani government today pleaded for other nations to send yet more lifting power. This is just a small indication of how severe these floods have been. More than 3 weeks on, and this is still the only way that this community can get any kind of food or water. Flying over the Swat Valley, the broken bridges and buildings point to the millions that must be spent if these communities are to be reconnected with the world. Right now, the only way out of the villages near Caan is by air, a terrifying experience for women and children who've never been more than a few miles from home. After 23 days trapped amongst the ruins of their homes and businesses, they feel they have no choice but to leave. For a millionaire who lives in luxury in London, it's a humbling experience. James feels that he must help. It's one small gesture utterly dwarfed by 20 million people now thought to depend on such charity. At the other end of the country in Sindh, there's nothing to see but floodwater. James came to Pakistan determined to make a difference, but the sight confronting him in Sarkar is overwhelming.
Whilst today you can see the desperate need to get aid and food, but the thing that's going through my mind is when this water disappears, what on earth are these people going to do? Their houses have been underwater for like a month. Assalamu alaikum.
Unbelievably, despite being marooned by the floods, this family have refused to leave their home and their livestock.
What she's saying is after 35 years, I can't leave now, because if I leave, then I've lost it all.
But hundreds of thousands have been forced to abandon their villages. They're still arriving in Sarkar, and the handful of refugee camps are overflowing. There is no more room. When I first came to Sarkar, I was horrified to see literally thousands of refugees surviving on the roadside with no shelter and no food. 2 weeks later, they're still here, and the aid agencies openly admit that they simply don't have the staff or the resources to work this far south. Given the chance, the displaced families want order. They know here in Naushura that this could be their life for months to come.
It's really actually quite heartbreaking because behind every face, every number, there is a face and a story, and we get to hear them. We're doing 50,000 people here in Naushura. Okay, we have a plan to try and scale that up to 7 times as many just in this location.
Together, Oxfam, UNICEF and the government have hired every single water tanker in Pakistan, and still they're not meeting the demand. James knows that his personal contribution, enough food for 1,000 families, is tiny. After speaking to men like Badshah Gul, who fears he may never afford to rebuild a home for his family, James reaches a bleak conclusion.
The only answer in this situation is we need to provide aid, and most importantly, they need our financial support, because we are looking at a reconstruction program here that is already estimated at $10 billion, and in simple terms, they don't have those funds.
Even if the world responds to this plea, it will be years rather than months before Pakistan emerges from the shadow of such catastrophic floods. Juliet Bremner, ITV News, Caan.